Hello everyone, this is Ly Tu Huyen, welcoming you back to Life Single Channel. Have you ever wondered what it feels like when your peaceful life suddenly shatters by a single phone call? When the police arrive at your doorstep with accusations you never imagined? What happens when a false accusation threatens to destroy everything you've built with love and sacrifice? Today, Huyen will share with you one of the most terrifying moments in their lives, when kindness was mistaken for crime, and when an ex-wife's shadow cast darkness over their humble home. Stay with us to witness how truth unfolds in the most unexpected way. The morning began like any other day in their mountain village. Huyen woke up early, preparing breakfast while Ly was already working in their small garden. The mist still clung to the hillsides, and the air carried the fresh scent of pine and wildflowers. Maya was still sleeping peacefully in her room. Inside the spare bedroom, the mysterious woman they had rescued 2 days ago was resting quietly, her condition slowly improving under Huyen's careful care. Huyen had just brought a bowl of warm porridge to the woman's room when she heard the sound of a vehicle approaching. It was unusual because their house was quite isolated, nestled among the terraced fields and far from the main road. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw a police car parking in front of their gate. Ly immediately stopped his work and walked toward the officers, his face showing confusion but maintaining his usual calm demeanor. 2 police officers stepped out of the vehicle, their expressions serious and official. The senior officer held a document in his hand and asked if this was the residence of Ly. When Ly confirmed, the officer explained they had received a report about a kidnapping and assault case. Someone named Thuy had filed a complaint claiming that Ly had abducted a woman and rendered her unconscious, keeping her captive in his house. Huyen felt her blood run cold. Her hands trembled as she stood at the doorway, unable to believe what she was hearing. How could anyone accuse Ly of such a horrible crime? The man who had saved her and Maya from starvation and homelessness. The man who treated Maya like his own daughter, the gentlest soul she had ever known. But then the name registered in her mind. Thuy, Ly's ex-wife. The woman who had abandoned him because he wasn't wealthy enough. What was she trying to do? Ly remained composed, though Huyen could see the tension in his jaw. He invited the officers inside and explained calmly that there was indeed a woman in their house, but the situation was completely different from what had been reported. Huyen quickly added that they had found the woman unconscious on the mountain path 2 days ago. She had been lying near a steep slope, and they had no choice but to bring her home because the nearest hospital was more than 3 hours away by rough mountain roads. The officers asked to see the woman immediately. Huyen led them to the spare room where the woman was resting. She was awake now, her eyes still weak but alert. When the police asked her what had happened, the woman's voice was hoarse but clear. She explained that she had been hiking alone trying to find a shortcut through the mountain when she slipped on loose rocks. She fell and hit her head, losing consciousness. The next thing she remembered was waking up in this room with Huyen caring for her wounds, giving her water and warm soup. The woman's testimony was completely opposite to Thuy's accusation. She confirmed that Ly and Huyen had saved her life. If they hadn't found her, she might have died from exposure, or her injuries might have worsened beyond help. She was grateful, not traumatized. She was rescued, not kidnapped. The officers listened carefully, taking notes and asking detailed questions about the timeline, the location where she was found, and the care she had received. The police investigation continued for another hour. They asked Ly to describe exactly what had happened that afternoon, 2 days ago. Ly explained that he and Huyen had been gathering firewood in the forest when they heard faint groaning sounds coming from below a rocky outcrop. They carefully climbed down and found the woman lying there, her clothes torn, blood on her forehead, barely conscious. Ly immediately checked her vital signs while Huyen tried to keep her awake by talking to her. They realized she needed medical attention urgently, but carrying her down the mountain to reach a vehicle would take hours, and her condition seemed critical. Huyen continued the story, her voice steady, despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. She told the officers how they had made the difficult decision to bring the woman to their home instead. Their house was only 20 minutes away through a forest path that Day knew well. They had a first aid kit, clean water, and warm shelter. Huyen had some basic medical knowledge from taking care of Maya through various childhood illnesses, and she knew how to clean wounds and recognize signs of serious injury. They had no telephone to call for help, no way to contact emergency services from that remote location. Their only option was to provide immediate care and hope the woman would stabilize enough to be transported later. The woman whose name they learned was Lan supported every detail of their account. She explained to the officers that when she regained full consciousness yesterday, Day and Huyen had offered to take her to the hospital, but she had felt too weak to endure the long journey. She had asked to rest one more day before attempting the trip. She showed the officers her phone, which had been dead since the fall. Huyen had tried to charge it, but the device had been damaged by water and wouldn't turn on. This explained why Lan's family hadn't been able to reach her, and why she hadn't been reported missing yet. The police officers examined the room carefully. They noted the clean bandages, the herbal medicine that Huyen had prepared according to traditional mountain remedies, the comfortable bedding, and the general atmosphere of care rather than captivity. There were no locks on the door, no signs of restraint, nothing that suggested anything sinister. One officer went outside to inspect the location Day had described, taking photographs and collecting information about the terrain. When the officers returned to the main room, the senior officer's expression had softened considerably. He acknowledged that the evidence clearly showed Day and Huyen had performed a rescue, not a kidnapping. Lan's testimony was consistent and credible. The physical evidence supported their story. The location where Lan was found matched Day's description perfectly, including the steep slope and loose rocks. Medical examination of Lan's injuries was consistent with a fall, not an assault. Everything pointed to the fact that Thuy's report was completely false. The officer then asked Day about his relationship with Thuy. Day explained, his voice quiet but honest, that Thuy was his ex-wife. They had divorced more than a year ago after Thuy left him for another man who had more money. Since then, they had no contact except for one brief encounter a few weeks ago, when Thuy had unexpectedly appeared in the village. Day had been with Huyen at the market, and Thuy had seen them together, looking happy with Maya. The encounter had been awkward but brief. Day had no idea why Thuy would make such a serious false accusation, but Huyen had a sinking feeling in her heart. She remembered the way Thuy had looked at them that day at the market. There had been something in her eyes, something cold and calculating beneath the surface of surprise. Was it jealousy, resentment, or something more dangerous? Huyen had mentioned her concern to Day afterward, but he had dismissed it, believing Thuy had moved on with her life. Now Huyen realized her instinct had been correct. Thuy hadn't moved on. She was watching them, perhaps planning something. The officers assured Day and Huyen that they would handle the matter appropriately. Making a false police report was a serious offense, and Thuy would be summoned to the station for questioning. They thanked Lan for her clear testimony and wished her a full recovery. Before leaving, the senior officer advised Day and Huyen to be careful and to contact the police immediately if they experienced any further harassment or suspicious activities. As the police car drove away, Huyen couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. 2 days later, Thuy was summoned to the police station. Huyen and Day were not present during her interrogation, but they later learned the details from the officer who handled the case. When confronted with the evidence, Thuy's story began to fall apart almost immediately. She claimed she had been passing by the area and had seen Dae carrying an unconscious woman into his house. She said she had watched from a distance and saw the woman appeared to be struggling, that Dae seemed to be forcing her inside, but the timeline didn't match. According to Thuy's own statement, she claimed to have witnessed this 2 days ago in the late afternoon. However, phone records showed that Thuy had been in town that entire day, more than 50 kilometers away from Dae's village. She couldn't have been anywhere near his house at the time she claimed to have witnessed the alleged kidnapping. When the officers pointed out this inconsistency, Thuy became flustered. She changed her story, saying perhaps it was a different day. Maybe she had confused the dates. The officers pressed further. Why had she waited so long to report such a serious crime? If she truly believed she had witnessed a kidnapping, why hadn't she called the police immediately? Why hadn't she tried to help the victim, or at least followed up to ensure the woman's safety? Thuy's answers were vague and contradictory. She stammered that she had been scared, that she wasn't sure what she had seen, that she needed time to think about whether she should get involved. Throughout the interrogation, Thuy avoided eye contact. Her hands fidgeted nervously with her phone. She asked multiple times if she was in serious trouble, if she could face charges. The officers explained that filing a false police report was indeed a criminal offense that could result in fines or even imprisonment. However, they said, if this was genuinely just a misunderstanding, if she had truly misinterpreted what she saw from a distance, then they might consider it an honest mistake rather than malicious intent. Thuy immediately seized this explanation. Yes, she said, it was just a misunderstanding. She had been confused about the dates and the details. She had only wanted to help if someone was in danger. She apologized profusely and promised it would never happen again. The officers issued her a stern warning about the consequences of wasting police resources and potentially ruining innocent people's lives with false accusations. They made it clear that if anything like this happened again, the consequences would be severe. Thuy nodded vigorously, signed the necessary documents, and left the station. But as she walked out into the sunlight, something shifted in Thuy's expression. The fearful, apologetic demeanor melted away, replaced by something harder, colder. She sat in her car for a long moment, staring at her phone, at the photos she had secretly taken of Dae and Huyen's happy life together, the comfortable home they had built, Maya's bright smile, the way Dae looked at Huyen with such devotion. Everything Thuy had thrown away was now someone else's treasure. The jealousy burned in her chest like acid. From a hilltop overlooking the valley where Dae's house sat peacefully among the terraced fields, Thuy's car was parked in the shadows. She watched the smoke rising from their chimney, the small figure of Maya playing in the garden. This wasn't over. The police might have believed her excuse this time, but Thuy knew the truth in her own heart. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was just the first move. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Dae and Huyen sat together on their porch. Maya was inside doing her homework, and Lan had finally felt strong enough to contact her family, who would arrive tomorrow to take her home. The immediate crisis had passed, and the truth had prevailed. But Huyen couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over her heart like a dark cloud. She leaned against Dae's shoulder and whispered her fears. What if Thuy tried something else? What if this was just the beginning? Dae wrapped his arm around her and promised that whatever came, they would face it together. Their love had survived poverty, abandonment, and prejudice. It would survive this too. But even as he spoke those reassuring words, both of them understood that Thuy's shadow still loomed over their happiness. Sometimes in life, the price of finding love and peace is eternal vigilance against those who seek to destroy it. truth had won this battle. But the war for their peaceful life was far from over. This is Ly Tu Huyen from Life Single Channel. Thank you for staying with us through this difficult chapter of their story. What do you think Tui is really planning? Do you believe her explanation was genuine? Or is there something darker at work? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to Life Single Channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss what happens next in their journey. Until next time, remember that truth and love will always find a way to shine through the darkness. See you soon.